over to Kim VanPelt, and you can do the rest.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kim VanPelt, and I work with St. Luke's Health Initiatives. We're a public foundation based in Arizona that focuses on strength-based community development and health policy in our state. I'm joined here today with three of my Arizona colleagues. Tony, you want to begin by introducing yourself?
Good morning. I'm Tony Banegas. I'm a philanthropic advisor with the Arizona Community Foundation.
I'm McMiles with the McMiles Foundation, which is a small family foundation.
Me llamo Teresa Brice, soy de Mesa, Arizona, and I'm the executive director of LISC Phoenix.
So thank you everyone for being here this morning, and we're really honored here to talk a little bit about the state of Arizona and really sort of, again, dispel some of the myths about our state, talk about our strengths, and talk about some of the good work that's happening on the ground. Our aim really is to help encourage you to think about Arizona as you make your investments and think about it, including it in your investment portfolio. And we as funders are also here to really talk about how we might collaborate with you in terms of doing good work on the ground. Before we begin, as some folks mentioned, there are a lot of myths about Arizona. And I know when I go to national conferences and I talk about how I'm from Arizona, I often get sort of this tilt of the head where people say, really? And so I wanted to begin with, what do you think of when you hear the word Arizona? What word comes to mind? So just give me one word.
Saguaro.
Saguaro, okay.
Can I just say cactus?
Yeah. You're supposed to know how to spell that if you're from Arizona. Discrimination, okay.
Reactionary.
Reactionary, all right. Retirement living, okay. Latino leadership, okay. Immigration.
Urban sprawl.
Urban sprawl. Anything else? McCain, okay. Goldwater.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry, what? Indian nations. Anything else?
Border.
The border. So certainly the words that you...
Did I get everybody's? Did I lose any of them? All right.
Okay. So certainly some of the things that you talked about are definitely true about Arizona. We have a lot of cacti, for example. But some of the things you mentioned, I think you could fairly say that they characterize the state in fairly negative terms. And what we want to do is really talk about how there's much more complexity to Arizona than you might otherwise think. So to begin with, let me begin by talking about why I live in Arizona and why I think as a funder it's a great place to invest. I think one of the most compelling reasons that you want to think about Arizona in terms of a place to invest is because of how young we are as a state. Arizona is only 100 years old, and when you compare that to communities, for example, back east that are maybe 300-400 years old, we really are at the beginning stages of our story. And we have been a very fast-growing state. In our population, for example, has grown by 25% just in the last 10 years. And over 72% of our population includes people who were born someplace else. Arizona is a young state, it's a growing state, and much of our growth and our story is ahead of us. Contrary to the perceptions, for example, that are out there that we're just a retirement kind of community, Arizona is actually younger in terms of its demographics than most states nationally, which surprises a lot of folks. So 26% of our population is under the age of 18. So I often like to think of Arizona the same way that I think of my 16-year-old son. He's grown a lot over the last few years. He sometimes makes not so great decisions at this age, but I see all sorts of potential ahead of him. That's how I think of Arizona. And I think it's why a lot of people find it a compelling place to live. This next clip is from a gentleman from the Phoenix Art Museum, and I think he essentially is expressing sentiments that a lot of us share.
I left a major city to come here because of the opportunity. You know, in a lot of East Coast cities, a lot of European cities, it's been done. And trying to do anything different is impossible. There's old point networks. It's very, very hard. Here, there's a can-do atmosphere. It is still the Wild West. There's still this frontier. There's this belief that you can make this what you want it to be, and that's a very, very rare thing. That's the original American spirit at work. I think all the right factors are here. There is the ingredients are here. What's needed is the resources and the leadership.
Another strength that Arizona possesses that, again, surprises a lot of people is that we are actually far more politically open than you might think. The electorate, for example, is fairly evenly split among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And we have a large percentage of our electorate that are independents, 32%. And the ideology of Arizonans is actually more moderate than you might otherwise think. Polling that's been done over a series of years shows that Arizonans could be categorized as essentially a little right of center, which is very different than you might otherwise think. When you hear about Arizona in the national media, they have a sort of right of Attila the Hun. It's far more complicated than that and far more diverse than you might otherwise think.
So I'm going to check off McCain and Goldwater, since McCain likes, I'm going to turn this off.
McCain likes to think of himself as the maverick, but in today's terms, Goldwater would be a moderate. So
Right.
check both of those off.
Another reason I think that Arizona is a great place to live and invest is that Arizonans really care about a lot of the same issues that I think you and I as funders care about. And where you really can see this exemplified is in the ballot initiatives that Arizonans routinely vote on. Arizona, like a lot of Western states, has the ability to bring different issues to the ballot to either change state law or put more funding to different issues. And what we've seen over the years is that Arizonans are committed to many issues. For example, during this last general election, Arizonans voted to uphold funding for an early childhood system in our state. Arizonans actually voted to tax themselves to put more funding into education, health, and human services during this last general election. We were one of only 6 states in the country in the year 2000 to actually expand our Medicaid program up to 100% of the federal poverty level. And polling that's been done in our state show that Arizonans' attitudes towards undocumented immigrants are similar to those of Americans as a whole. Also, we've seen time and time again through polling that's been done that Arizonans are very committed to their communities. 56% say that they're currently undertaxed or taxed at the right level. And that polling that's been done by the Gallup organization shows that Arizonans are more committed to their communities than other states, and 57% say they're very proud to live in their communities. Another thing that you might not really know, not being from Arizona, is just how diverse we are. Often I think there's this image of Arizonans being sort of this white guy on a horse riding off into the sunset. That's really not our state, or at least doesn't tell the whole story. First of all, we're very, very diverse in terms of urban versus rural. The Phoenix area is now the 6th largest city in the country, and we are actually one of the most urban states in the country, even though we have wide open areas and lots of folks living in rural areas. We have also a lot of diversity in terms of culture and ethnicity. We have 21 federally recognized tribes, and 30% of the population is Hispanic. This chart up here is from the New York Times, and what it really shows is how much Arizona is changing and how much we are growing to be becoming a very diverse state. What you see here is a listing of various urban centers across the country. And what this shows is the split between Anglos and non-Anglos. And what you see is in the Phoenix metro area, over 85% of the population is Anglo. But when you look at the kid population, you see only 44% of the population is Anglo. So we really are a state that's undergoing a lot of change right now. We're becoming more and more diverse, and I think that's a strength for our future. I talked about how new our state is and how we're very much a blank slate. And I think that's one of the things that's great about living in our community is that we really see a willingness to work together and to forge partnerships that you might not otherwise see. And this next clip shows 3 mayors in the Phoenix area, the mayor of Phoenix, the mayor of Mesa, and the mayor of Tempe, talking about their willingness to work together to do sustainable development along our light rail system. And it really exemplifies the kinds of partnerships that are possible in our state.
With Phoenix, Mesa, and Tempe coordinating our efforts, we're much more likely along that entire rail line to do better together.
It isn't about whether it's in Phoenix or Mesa, it's along light rail.
It's not a Republican, a Democrat, a Tea Party, a liberal thing. It's about quality of life.
My last point is that Arizonans are also very responsive, and we've seen that most recently in response to the Senate bill that you probably have all heard about, Senate Bill 1070. When Senate Bill 1070 was passed, a lot of Arizonans, quite frankly, were very embarrassed by it, and we've seen a lot of activism that's occurred as a result of it. In our most recent legislative session, there was a whole round of additional anti-immigration bills that were defeated because of the political activism that we saw. And we also saw the business community responding in full force, saying these immigration bills were not state. We also now have a recall election coming up in early November of Senator Pierce, who was the author of that Senate Bill 1070. And this is the first recall election of a sitting Senate president in the country's history. Again, really exemplifying the kind of activism that's possible. And as I noted time and time again, we've seen Arizonans respond when the Arizona legislature doesn't do something that they like through the ballot initiative process. So I've talked about some of the strengths that Arizona has and hopefully dispelled some of the myths. I think I got to just about everything up here, except for maybe the sprawl issue.
And actually the segment you saw about the mayors was actually specifically addressing sprawl in the Phoenix metro area and how the light rail is addressing that. So we'll get to that a little bit later.
And I think the others are probably fairly accurate. I mean, obviously we have cactus. We are a border state. But we, I think hopefully dispelled some of the myths that were quite as reactionary as you might think, that immigration has been both a strength as well as a challenge politically for us, and that the attitudes towards immigration aren't nearly what you think in terms of the portrayal in the national media. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tony Banegas. Everything about Arizona is not all great, and we have our challenges, and perhaps that's one of the reasons we would love for you to work with us.
Great. And like Kim said, there's been a lot of good work happening in our state, but we have some challenges. Up until a few years ago, Arizona was the fastest growing state in the country before we were taken over by Nevada. So of course we're paying the consequences, and Arizona has consistently ranked third highest among states in the rate of foreclosure. The Morrison Institute out of Arizona State University just published a report last week that the census that was taken last year shows that 14% of Maricopa County houses were vacant. They say that 227,000 homes were empty last year. To put it in perspective, this is the same size of all housing units combined, condominiums and apartments in the city of Tucson. Empty, just to, you can visualize that. Most recent data shows that Arizona has the second highest poverty rate in the country. The state budget has been reduced by 27%. So you can imagine the impact that has on a whole variety of issues in the state.
And just to mention, oftentimes you hear about California and their budget challenges. Arizona's budget challenges have actually been more profound than California's when you look at the budget deficit as percentage of our entire budget.
So we have a lot of work to do to engage more Arizonans. The most recent Gallup poll that was done showed us that only 10% of Arizonans believe their elected officials reflect their interests. They say they will have very few competitive districts, so of course you don't allow for new blood to come in and get elected. The primary election turnout is very low, 20 to 25%, so that allows for a lot of the radical views to, folks with radical views to get elected. And even though we're the third largest registered voters, the independents, I say we now, just show my color, few independent votes in primaries. And we know the independents are the third, both parties need the independents to really win an election. Engagement with public officials is lower for Latinos, low income and less educated. Now I should mention though that because of the SB 1070, there's been a momentum to register Latinos, and we have seen an increase in voter registration and participation among the Latino community, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Okay. So why do we need this outside philanthropic support? Many Arizona foundations are very young. 47% of foundations now operating in the state have been established in the past 10 years. My own institution, the Arizona Community Foundation, we've only been around for 31 years, and we are one of the largest funders in the state. Most Arizona foundations is very small. 71% have assets under $1 million. Arizona still ranks in the bottom third, 40th place in the U.S. in terms of private foundations and assets per capita. We also had ranked, according to the last Gallup poll, 40th in terms of individual charitable giving. Last year, we did an assessment of among nonprofits and foundations about the work being done in civic engagement among funders and the nonprofit community. And now I'll introduce my colleague, Pat Miles, who will talk to you and share the work that was done.
This assessment is pictured over here on our graphs, our matrix. And what we found when we started to do this work, and we really wanted to see what were the Arizona nonprofits and foundations doing in terms of advocacy. So that was really the purpose of our assessment. What we found is that at the present time, immigration and human rights issues are really the main focus of our advocacy work. Now, in this graph that you see up here, this is the trend in future efforts around advocacy. And there's still a lot of interest in human rights and immigration, but the main focus at this point is on the economic development, taxes, budget, and that's quite understandable, thinking in terms of our present fiscal situation. What became immediately clear, and which you can see on the matrix, are the areas where there's been a lot of work being done. There are certain areas where there's lots of work, lots of particular kind of advocacy being done. And then there are other areas where there's hardly any. So what this does really is it shows us within the state where we need to focus our energy, and also hopefully is a tool to leverage funds from outside the state. So it's also a basis for new coalitions and collaborations, which we already see. I think Arizona is not the same as it was a year ago. There's a lot of new energy and collaboration. And let's see, where do I?
So I'll add that.
Yep.
So what Pat and some others did is they sent out questionnaires looking at where folks have been investing in terms of funders and also where the nonprofits are doing activities. And we definitely see from the two matrices over to the left where some gaps exist, which are helping us as funders figure out how to fill in the gaps, and also where do we need to make connections among organizations. For example, my organization does a lot of work in health advocacy, but we're not as familiar with all the work that's being done in immigration. Clearly, there's some overlap there. We both care about budget issues and political issues in terms of the values that are held by the state legislature. So we're learning how to make the connections. And this chart right here is really showing where funders are committing in the future. And what's exciting about this is what we see as funders is a real shift among a lot of the funders in terms of more commitment to actually starting looking at issues such as political engagement and advocacy. These were not big areas of emphasis in the past. We are definitely seeing a shift where all of a sudden funders who had no public policy in the past are actually putting resources into it. And we were just talking even before we began this meeting, there's a whole array of funders that just a year ago would never have brought up the word civic engagement or public policy, who are actually talking about it now, which is exciting for us.
And the other thing I would say is that this matrix represents our first effort at measuring the kind of work that's being done. It's giving us baseline data against which we can begin to evaluate how impactful our work is in the arena of social justice and policy. So this was a very good start so that we can assess where we are and we can set goals for what we want to accomplish in the future.
Great. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was talking to some folks from Public Campaign about public financing in elections. And it seems like Arizona offers some particular opportunities for some advocacy or other work because of existing policy. I mean, I think one of the pushback against Pierce is not only against SB 1070, but also against his effort to put on the ballot a major effort to essentially make public financing of campaigns illegal in Arizona. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, I mean, you may be doing this in the course of the presentation, but some particular opportunities that exist in Arizona because of some policy work that is already on the ground there that may be kind of a laboratory for some other things around the country.
You know, I think you bring up an excellent point that certainly our public financing is one opportunity that can be taken advantage of. If it's okay with you, what we're going to do next is we're going to actually talk about some of the good work on the ground, but let's make sure that we specifically address that issue. So Pat's going to now talk about some of the investments specifically that are happening right now in the area of human rights and immigrant rights and some of the good work that's occurring.
And as I said just previously, this is an area that was the main focus for the present advocacy efforts in Arizona. And what I'd like to do now is just highlight 3 organizations that the McMiles Foundation has funded for the last several years. And I see all of these as examples of commendable work, really, in terms of making an impact. The first one is Border Action Network, which is located in Tucson, has a statewide presence. It's a community organizing effort focused on immigrant workers, their families, and on border communities to ensure that their rights are protected, their human dignity upheld, and their communities are healthy and safe places to live. This organization has been extremely successful at bringing community organizing and public policy advocacy together at the community, state, and federal level. They have secured agreements with local police, educated Arizonans about anti-immigration issues, and promoted accountability and rights protections as part of a national border policy. They have had U.S. senators and representatives visit the border, and they play an increasingly important role in coordinating state-based responses and bringing together national connections, both in struggling to overcome SB 1070 and in the border policy reform movement. So they're an extremely active group. The second organization is Valley Interfaith Project. And there's someone in the audience actually who knows more about this than I do, and that's Joe Rubio. But again, a very positive, solid grassroots community organization that has had an impact in the Valley for the past 20 years. It has intensified its efforts to train leaders who can mobilize its 40 member organizations, which are schools, labor unions, and faith. And I think an important mention here is that these groups represent the diversity of the state in terms of race, economic levels, and faith traditions. Whether it is VIP, late-night presence at the legislature, working with business leaders to successfully leverage bipartisan Senate opposition to 5 anti-immigration bills that had been introduced after the passage of SB 1070, or VIP holding civic academies, using data from Morrison Institute and engaging Secretary of State Ken Bennett and inviting Goldwater Institute to educate the public about the causes and consequences of Arizona's economic crisis. Or perhaps VIP developing new relationships in key legislative districts or walking areas around school districts, in one case with the new Phoenix Chief of Police, to better understand the local schools and their neighborhood concerns. Or even better, VIP leading a delegation of immigrants and VIP leaders to Washington to work with John Morton, Undersecretary in charge of ICE, to reform the 287G contract between ICE and local law enforcement, which had been used as a cover for racial profiling by the Maricopa County Sheriff Department. Or finally, VIP securing a $476,000 allocation from the U.S. Department of Labor to launch Arizona Career Pathways, to move underemployed, low-skilled adult workers onto a pathway to high-skilled family wage jobs. That is modeled after some very successful programs in Texas and in Tucson, Arizona. In spite of VIP's many effective strategies, they realize that there will be no quick fix to a situation that has been in the making the past 30 years. But they remain committed to patient organizing, to rebuild the institutions, and to identify a new generation of leaders who understand the importance of investing in those who will inherit the state, including immigrants, children, and many living on the margins of economic security. I would also like to acknowledge at this time that VIP has been named a finalist for the 5 Communities Award from the Center for the Future of Arizona in recognition of its efforts to provide effective development of citizen engagement. And finally, Protecting Arizona Family Coalition, which is a coalition of human service providers, has over the past 10 years literally educated hundreds of organizations and thousands of individuals to prepare them for public policy work, to help prevent budget cuts in health and human services for children, families, and vulnerable adults. One of their high priorities is to work to try to avoid pitting one social service agency against another. PAFCO is a small but mighty organization that is very well known down at the state capitol, with almost a daily presence during the legislative session. They are also valued by their constituents for their daily online legislative updates, and also as having a significant media presence. Last week, PAFCO had a very interesting gathering of 50 nonprofits, which really there were 165 individuals there, to hear a speaker from Nonprofit Vote. Lindsay Hodel, who shared the research that supports the effectiveness of what is called agency-based voter education and voter registration. This approach involves having the social service agencies, who literally serve hundreds of thousands of clients yearly, develop a way to integrate voter education materials and voter registration forms into their present service model. It was a very positive response to her talk among the social service agencies. The next 4 groups that I will speak about are really groups that show the new energy in Arizona. People really are mobilizing and organizations are collaborating. So One Arizona is a perfect example of this. It is a coalition of nonprofits that was established in 2010, shortly after the passage of SB 1070. It has as its mission to help build the long-term electoral power of the Latino voter. With the 2010 midterm elections only 6 months away at the time of its formation, Their immediate effort was voter registration, with their target population being the low propensity Latino voter. A few positive results. Almost 40% of the individuals that they registered did vote. Among the 18 to 24-year-olds, there was an 11% increase in voting from the previous midterm election. And in our current election, our 2011 primary mayoral election, there was an 80% increase in Latino voters compared to the 2007 primary. The last couple of months, members of One Arizona have been out in full force in District 18 to register voters for the election following the recall of Russell Pierce. The Arizona Dream Coalition, a group of mostly high school and college students, is working to shed light on the Federal Dream Act, which is basically a national issue, but they have some hope of finding support for some changes at the state level. The positive aspect of this effort, to me anyway, is seeing the youth of the state mobilized and organized around an issue that is important to them and to their families. My hope is that the experience they are gaining in leadership, development, community organizing, and civic engagement around this issue will prepare them to become active in other public policy issues. This group has currently joined the effort with One Arizona to register voters in the famous District 18. Promise Arizona grew out of a relationship with Reform Immigration for America, whose mission was and continues to be to reform the nation's broken immigration system. What solidified Promise Arizona's formation was their 103-day vigil at the Arizona State Capitol, which in their eyes was a protest against the movement in Arizona to legalize discrimination by the passing of SB 1070. One of their most significant contributions to date has been to reach out to mobilize Hispanic youth, many ASU students, to redirect their passion and frustration over the passage of SB 1070 into what has become an extremely successful voter registration campaign. Promise Arizona is actually part of One Arizona, and they too are working in District 18. The Latino Giving Circle is a new model in philanthropy, and it was started to develop more Latino philanthropy in Arizona, made up of 25 professional Latino women who donate $1,000 a year, which is matched by Arizona Community Foundation. Their focus is education, immigration, leadership, and health. Their grant in 2010 was to provide funds to Border Action Network to create a 24-hour hotline for people to call to get nonpartisan information about SB 1070. This effort is notable for several reasons. As I mentioned, it is a new model for philanthropy, with Arizona being the only state with this particular model. And it is an opportunity for women to be in leadership position, to direct their dollars to issues that are important to them. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Tony, who will talk about Arizona assets in terms of civic leadership and engagement. Tony?
Great. And I mentioned we do have many challenges, but we know there's a lot of good work being done. So I'll highlight some of the good work done in civic engagement and leadership. The Flint Foundation, and some of these are fairly new. Even though some of the host agencies have been around for a long time, you'll see that some of these are started in the last few years. The Flint Foundation has been around for a while. Last year, they started the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership, where they bring in 25 individuals from across the state into a 12-week seminar on leadership skills. Their goal is to have individuals to, after they complete this training, to go into public office, elected offices, and be active in their community. Again, this just started last year. They're just going through the second class right now. The Hispanic Leadership Institute. This one has been around for over 20 years. Valle del Sol is a well-known nonprofit in the Phoenix area. They've been around for over 40 years. This is a 20 weeks leadership training. They built on the rich heritage of Latinos, the history that we have with the state, but they also provide a lot of leadership skills training, again, so these Latinos can be elected and represented in public office. They also try to get Latinos engaged on nonprofit boards, and they have an ongoing announcement on their website about openings and boards throughout the state. So the excuse that we don't have enough Latinos to serve on board, that doesn't fly with them, because they have over 700 who have completed this leadership training over the last 20 years. They work in 4 different counties, the main counties in the state, and just this year they also started the African American Leadership Institute, which is a 10 weeks leadership training, but it's also modeled right after the Hispanic Leadership Institute. Valley Leadership, this is the oldest one in the state. It's been around for over 30 years. They select 50 individuals through a very competitive process. And you complete a 9-month training through a lot of different topics. I'm happy to report that I'm a graduate of the class 21. I would say the best class of the whole program. They also have the teen leadership program that started in 1989, and the goal is to work with juniors and sophomores throughout Maricopa County. They have 50 per class, and again, is to build the next generation of leaders in Maricopa County so they can get active in their community. St. Luke's Health Initiatives, they've been doing a lot of work and advocacy with 20 nonprofits that are doing work on health and human services. St. Luke's is funding Community Catalysts to do an assessment of their group's current policy and ability to advocate effectively. Their assessment will be completed in December, and early next year, Community Catalysts will be working with a group to develop a strategic plan aiming at strengthening the group's ability to work together. St. Luke's is also doing place-based work in 2 neighborhoods in Phoenix, in Maryvale, which is in Central Phoenix, and Southwest Phoenix. They're working with Pancho Weyes and Monica Hernandez of Colectivo Flatlander to provide grassroots leadership to these 2 neighborhoods. The National Institute for Civil Discourse, this is brand new, again, just started this year. Hosted at the University of Arizona in Tucson. It's co-chaired by former President Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. And the goal is, again, to promote civil discourse, civic engagement, and civic leadership. O'Connor House, again, this started this year. O'Connor House was started by former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. They just held this past month, September, the first annual day of civic action. It's called It Is Up to Me, and they claimed that had over 500 people there in the gathering, where people heard from the speakers, but also had an opportunity to connect with folks doing work on the ground. Another work that they're doing is the Centennial Voter Initiative. They have trying to piggyback to our celebration next year, our 100th anniversary, and their goal is to work with other nonprofits and grassroots throughout the state to register more people to vote and to be engaged in the voting process. And now I'd like to turn it over to my good colleague, Teresa Brice, and she'll tell you about the good work being done on place-based philanthropy and community leadership, community development.
Thank you, Tony. And I'm going to stand because I can't see the people on that side. So I want to talk a little bit about community development. That is LISC's work. We do this work in 30 offices across the country. And we believe that community development really starts with a sense of place. And as you've heard from Kim and others, Arizona has been such a fast-growing state. We have people coming to our state from all over the country, and including immigrants, that in many ways, it's very difficult to develop a sense of place for all these newcomers. And so, as you've heard these examples, a lot of philanthropy has really been focused on issue philanthropy. You hear the focus on immigration, civic engagement, leadership, health, arts. And what LISC wanted to emphasize in Arizona was place-based philanthropy. So we pulled together a group of funders, and we said we would like to explore a model of place-based philanthropy. So we created what's called the Neighborhood Development Collaborative, and we created a whole infrastructure for funders who were interested in exploring this model to come together. And so we selected some neighborhoods, and you can see at the bottom I had to use just the acronyms for all the funders because their names were too long. Arizona Community Foundation, LISC, St. Luke's Health Initiative, JP Morgan Chase Foundation, Lodestar, and Banegas United Way. And in Phoenix, we also have the City of Phoenix participating with us. And the goal was to identify 2 specific neighborhoods in Phoenix where we could actually support a nonprofit agency to convene the residents and begin to plan for their future. In one case, Golden Gate Community, this was a neighborhood that had very strong roots, but also a large number of residents that had been displaced by airport redevelopment, and they were moved from that neighborhood into this other neighborhood, and it was difficult knitting these 2 groups together. After 18 months, the groups came together and they created a quality of life plan that established 4 priorities: community safety, educational opportunities, neighborhood revitalization, and communication. And here are some of the results of that. You can see that in terms of educational opportunities, they wanted to have a uniform exchange so that the kids could feel comfortable when they went to school, that they would have clothes that were appropriate. In terms of community safety, they helped to do, and neighborhood revitalization, they helped to organize a paint-a-thon where volunteers came in to help paint the houses of those that were not able to do so. And in the area of communication and building community spirit, they held events such as barbecues, cleanups, and a posada, recognizing their cultural heritage. The second community is Central City South. Central City South is located immediately south of the downtown, and this one neighborhood contains 2/3 of all the city public housing in the city of Phoenix. It has a lot of challenges. It had a lot of crime. But this neighborhood came together with some work that had been funded by the Arizona Community Foundation, St. Luke's Health Initiative, and they began, prior to even our work, building their community leadership. What our work helped them to do was to focus on the quality of life plan and begin to prioritize the work that they wanted to undertake together. That quality of life plan had over 8 priorities that the community wanted to take on. But here's one example. Very specific to their housing goal, where they did a fix-it pilot project using a very small amount of seed money from State Farm, and they brought in volunteers from out the community, from the United Way, from churches, from Bomberos, which is a Hispanic Firefighters Association, and they began to address those issues in houses that affected health and safety, like improved lighting, improving the sidewalks. So it was more than just the cosmetic, it was actually helping to address health and safety issues in the community. So the second project that I want to talk about specifically deals with sprawl, and I'm so glad somebody brought that up. The built environment in Phoenix developed as a result of the automobile, and in many ways our built environment reflects the disconnection in our community, because as we built further and further away from our city centers, it became harder and harder for people to begin to know their neighbors and to come together to create a better, stronger, more resilient neighborhoods. And so we created, our first step was to bring people together on a civic engagement project, which you see here, Making Sustainable Communities Happen. And this is a PowerPoint presentation, an 8-page booklet, which is on the table outside. If you go outside, you'll see our booklet. And then it has web resources. And this presentation was presented to over 1,000 people in its first year. And we have a volunteer speakers bureau from another coalition called the Livable Communities Coalition that takes this presentation into the neighborhoods, different organizations, and helps to begin to explore the issues of sustainable communities and smart growth. You might remember, if I show you this document, the Neighborhood Funders Group published this document called A Sense of Place, Place-Based Grant Making in Practice. And this is, the models that are contained in here are reflected in the Sustainable Communities Working Group. The models that are here talk about the work of philanthropy coming together, mostly around transit. And Phoenix is a little bit slower, but we're happy to say that we've now joined this group, and we convened a group of folks that includes state, local, and regional leadership, private sector organizations such as LISC, Raza Development Corporation, Urban Land Institute, and State Farm, and then nonprofit organizations to begin to implement some of these ideas and put them to work on the ground along our light rail corridor. And one of the goals was to create a sustainable communities fund. We've seen similar funds in the Bay Area, in Denver, in Boston, and in the Twin Cities. Our fund is starting small with a $10 million lending commitment from LISC and Raza Development Fund, but we are already beginning to see developers come forward, and using our criteria, our priorities for smart growth, we begin to see projects that are evolving along the light rail. Two that have opened up most recently is this very innovative Apache ASL Trails. It's an affordable housing development for deaf seniors. All the services are provided in American Sign Language, and accommodations are made for the hearing impaired. And the second one just had its grand opening last week. Divine Legacy, developed by Native American Connections, is right at a light rail station and immediately adjacent to a commercial building that houses 3 Native American service providers. So these are just some examples of how we're putting our smart growth efforts to work to mitigate the effects of sprawl in our community. And there are many more, and I encourage you to take a look at the table outside where you can see others examples of collaborations that are coming together in Arizona. And so for a wrap-up, I'd like to ask Pat to talk about how you can access all this information and help us in our work in Arizona.
The Arizona Grantmakers Forum, which is our regional association, is really an indispensable part of Arizona's philanthropic community. And they have asked us to acknowledge, first of all, their grant of $200,000 from the Kellogg Foundation in 2004, which has really, been responsible for a lot of its growth. Please note the website and also the email addresses of both Tom Toretta and Teresa and Marissa Tyson. They are very friendly and will be very helpful. They will either, get you the answers that you need or find the people that will be able to do that. The matrix also is posted on their website under the Public Policy Committee, which is really a new endeavor by the Arizona Grantmakers Forum, which really will engulf a continuation of this effort that we've made to collect the matrix and build on. So they are the organization to connect. Their annual report and their Arizona Giving Report is also out on the table, which gives you a lot of information about who's doing what in Arizona in terms of funding.
So thank you, Pat. So we've had a lot of good information about some of the good work that's happening on the ground, hopefully dispelled some myths. Are there some questions that we can answer? Maybe I'll begin by answering the question that was brought up during our presentation about some of the assets that exist that may help change sort of the political context in our state. One is, as you mentioned before, we certainly have a system that will allow public financing of elections, which is an opportunity in Arizona. Another opportunity that we have in our state is we're a big mail-in ballot state, so you can actually vote by mail. And I don't think it's really ever been used to its full potential, another real possibility for our state. We also have right now a lot of talk that's occurring around a ballot initiative that may be put on the ballot in 2012, which is basically to create a top 2 voting system similar to what's been acted in California, where we would no longer have primaries where Republicans are elected or chosen to run for election and Democrats are chosen and then they compete. It would be basically the top 2 vote getters who would then go to a runoff election. So that is a ballot initiative that is likely to be on the ballot in 2012, which many think will could potentially change Arizona quite significantly in terms of its politics. Joe Rubio, are there other things in terms of assets that you would add that we haven't talked about?
It's been very thorough.
Okay.
I just think that I like to underscore it. The state is much more moderate in how the politics reflect it.
Yeah.
But people are either disaffected or they're just not connected in a way because so many are engaged in the state.
Yeah.
And that's the work of the organizing, helping to connect people to institutions, organizations, and others so that they know they have the space to create something different.
And let me just share a personal story. Tony mentioned before the work that SLHI, my organization, is doing, bringing together groups to work on advocacy. We, about a year ago, brought together about 20 organizations that routinely work on budget issues. And they're primarily health-related organizations, but we also had some education organizations at the table. And what we said to them is, what can we do to help you in terms of advocacy? And what they said is, nothing that we do that we've done in the past works anymore, because the politics has gotten so crazy. And so what we said to them is, well, let us help you think through how you can do your work differently. And that's why we've brought in Community Catalyst from Boston to first do an assessment about how can we strengthen advocacy capacity in our state. What we see right now is a changing environment where everybody's trying to do work differently, and they're trying to make connections in new ways. And so some of this work in terms of the matrix reflects that. So, and we're seeing, as I said before, funders who traditionally don't touch public policy all of a sudden talking about public policy, and we're seeing connections between groups that we haven't seen before. So like Joe just talked about, I think a lot of our work is how do we make the connections and how do we get people engaged moving forward. And we have some of the assets there, and we think that we have the landscape to be able to make significant change. It's just, you know, making the investments, doing the hard work. So can we answer some questions for folks in the room?
One of the things I forgot to do in the beginning is just, and then some people had to go to other commitments, but let's just do a quick round of everyone else in the room.
That would be lovely. Please.
Great.
Hi, I'm Margarita Banegas. I'm Deputy Director of Grant Making for the Liberty Hill Foundation in Los Angeles.
Excellent.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lucretia John, Program Officer of the Funding Exchange.
Hi.
Ned White from the Unitarian Universalist Beach Program in Shelter Rock on Long Island.
Frank Sanchez, what do we need more from?
Peter Black, the CEO of Larger Casey Foundation.
Dylan Corbett, I work with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Teams of Power, Improving the Catholic Development.
Benny Shepherd with the Mid-American Community of the Joe Rubio with the Arizona Interfaith Network.
Excellent. So were there some items that we mentioned today that excited you? Did we dispel some of the myths for you? What did you think?
I think it's encouraging. And I left for this session and I came right back because it was more interesting. Get more interesting.
Good.
But
Good.
I thought, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I haven't focused a lot on Arizona. We know, of course, what we hear.
Right.
It makes you think about all of these boycott Arizona campaigns, you know, whether they can be justified. It makes you think about a lot of things, but because it's a lot of solidarity or movements. And of course, I came to this so we can learn, given what's going on in Alabama, and a huge, I guess, a big call to action to mobilize people to Alabama. And so it's just, it's a whole different state, of course, it's a different situation, but so I found it very encouraging.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can take 1 minute, Kim, I overlooked one of my favorite projects on the PowerPoint, the Center for the Future of Arizona. It's been around for almost 10 years. And they, based on the Gallup poll that was done, they created what is called the Civic Index, where they assess, citizen engagement, philanthropy. And out of that, they came up with the citizen goals, very specific, on things that people think that are important to create the Arizona we want. Some of those goals include job creation, healthcare, environment, and civic engagement. And each one has very specific outcomes and indicators, to keep track of progress over time. And out of that came out what they call the 5 Communities Project. So they had an RFP, at the state on how they would address each one of those goals. They got over 96 applications. They had 10 finalists selected last month. Each finalist is getting $5,000, and I'm happy to report that we are providing half of that, the Arizona Communities Foundation. But the next step is they'll select 5 out of those 10. That's what the name, the 5 Community Project. And they'll work with the Center, Future of Arizona, to apply for funding at a national level to really implement 2 or 3 of those citizen goals. So that one I just could not overlook that because it's really exciting and very important.
And one of the cool things about the Center for Arizona's Future and the Arizona We Want is they use Gallup as really the framework of what do Arizonans want, and then they're organizing across goals and not only just identifying the goals and indicators, but actually then convened sort of experts in different areas to say, how do we get there now? And so that's some of the most recent work is in terms of investing in identification of strategies to help Arizonans reach their goals. So one of their goal areas, for example, is on civic engagement, and it's talking about how do we get voters, for example, to vote in Arizona. And some of that work, for example, the 5 communities work, will be looking at civic engagement, looking at folks like Joe's group to be able to really foster that citizen engagement. So, you know, as I'll just close by saying, you know, when you again think of Arizona, think of my teenage son, my 16-year-old. Because this is really, I think, the way you need to look at Arizona. We've got a ton of potential. I mean, that's truly why I live in Arizona. I grew up moving every 1 or 2 years, but have lived in Arizona now for 25 years. And it's because I'm committed to the state. I love the state. And we've got so much potential. So when you see us going through our awkward phases, think about helping us, not staying away from us. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
This morning was to introduce Arizona to the neighborhood funded community, and I think we still got some work to do. So hopefully everyone can help, helping bridge and build those relationships with the Arizona Foundation. I think the neighborhood funded group is probably a thing group that you should be very close to, and also to try to kind of fulfill that goal of partnering you up when outside foundations come into the state. This is a great presentation, and I think it should be widely seen and distributed. So anything that we can do, any opportunities, but let's put our organizer hat on and work the conference, introduce our colleagues from Arizona.
Thank you.
The other thing is, we did make a video, and this will be also on the Arizona Grantmakers website. So if anybody wants to refer to it in the future.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi. So at the funding exchange, we're definitely looking at ways to partner with the work that's happening in Arizona.
Great.
We've been speaking with Pat and other grantmakers about ways that we can partner, particularly around supporting grassroots community organizing groups in Arizona, right? Like as a way of energizing both low-income families and low-income communities throughout the state, and so to create that partnership, right? The civic engagement piece, the grassroots organizing piece, to really have to really advance like social justice within Arizona, but really to have it be the place, like you said, like it's reflective of your values.
Right. And again, Arizona Grantmakers Forum is a great place to connect, but we also, all 4 of us, are more than happy to help you make connections, introduce you to people, help you explore sort of the lay of the land of different groups that are doing that work. Anything that you want to do and any way you want to connect, we're all committed to helping you make that connection.
I think the other thing is the 2 new CEOs of the Arizona Community Foundation and also in Tucson are very much on the same page, which is a change over the last few years. So I think that's also a great resource in terms of connecting with them. And again, Arizona Grantmakers and Arizona Community Foundation especially work very closely together. So those would be good contacts.
And you have a new CEO as well.
That's right.
Yeah, we actually, St. Luke's Health Initiatives has a new CEO. His name is Fred Karnas, and he's actually been active in the housing community for years. He reports to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development currently. And he's coming back to Arizona, where he's from, to lead our organization. He'll be starting next week, so we're very excited.
So we're already seeing the connection between housing and health, because St. Luke's has been at our table working on transit issues, and so